The previous lesson, we talked briefly about Hud alayhi salam, and he was sent to the Bani Ad, and Bani Ad are referred to in Surah Al-Ahqaf, the sand dunes, which is Surah 46. Ahqaf is an area located on the border between South Arabia and north of Yemen, in that area that you can see on the map. He lived for a period of 70 years, and he was sent specifically to this particular tribe, the tribe of the Banu Ad. Now, they were famous for building magnificent structures and lofty towers. They carved out these things in the rocks. But in the process of building these magnificent structures, they became arrogant, and they even became somewhat ignorant of what the other loftier ideals of living were about, which is obeying what the prophets have come with as their messages over time. And they refused to accept this divine guidance. So the punishment raged on them for 8 days and 7 nights in concession. And this entire tribe was wiped out. Their dwellings were destroyed. And with time, in fact, with all the different sand dunes and the wind formations and wind movements in that area, even vestiges of what they built were kind of sort of not available to be seen in later times. Now, what we learn from this particular this lesson of Surah Hud, is our achievements in life, no matter how amazing they may be, are nothing in terms of the grand scheme of things, if we don't have the belief in one God, the monotheism, as well as that answerability on the day of judgment. And arrogance, pride, and wealth is the root of many societies and communities in the past, in terms of their not only their decline, but their ultimate annihilation. So I think we did that last week. I'll just go over the Surah Kaf itself, because sorry, just mute yourself, all of you. All right, so essentially what this surah covers is there's an inescapable punishment that awaits those who deny truth and resurrection, right? And communities more established than the Meccans, who the Quran was revealed to, have been destroyed in the past. So the Meccans should take a lesson from this, as well as we living today should take a lesson from all these past empires that were there and are no longer there. The jinn also believed in the Quran before the disbelievers of Mecca actually did. And the Prophet is encouraged to be steadfast and await God's judgment in terms of whatever the disbelievers, their fate would be. Now, in terms of this one, we can think about some states today, the Gulf and elsewhere, where they build amazing structures. They build it on land as well as in the Gulf and in the sea. Some of the highest structures. This is all in competition with other communities and other states next door, or even elsewhere. And when they built it as well, they had in mind that they should build in earthquake protection. But with all that, no matter how great the technology has been, the question is there any guarantee that these structures will last, and even they as a people, will they survive, right? And are they really strong? And history has proven otherwise. So please mute your mics. All right, so today we continue with this part of the genealogy table. So Saleh is the next prophet we'll be doing. Okay, I'm getting some interference. Are all of you on mute? All right, so we'll be doing Saleh first, and then we're going on to Ibrahim and Lut, and then if there's time, we'll do Ismail and Ishaq, the two children of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now, if you look at Saleh, he stands alone in terms of that lineage. There's a line connecting him to the top, and he was sent to another area which is to the north of Arabia, and we'll cover that in detail just now. And then on the other line, in terms of the genealogy, we have a person by the name of Azar, who was the seller of idols and the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who had two sons. One is Ibrahim himself, and on another line, he had another son And that's one generation further. That person had a son called Lut. So in one sense, Ibrahim is like the uncle of Lut alayhi salam as well. And they were both contemporaries. But then we have Ibrahim alayhi salam, just in a nutshell, he had two wives. The first wife was Sarah, and from whom very late in life, when they were both almost 90 or 100 years each, when the chances of them actually bearing a child was very, very slim. Allah gave them a miracle in their life, and the son Ishaq was born at a very, very late stage when she was barren and he was also old. And Ishaq is this lineage here, and this gives us the Banu Israel and all the prophets that went to the Banu Israel, the Jewish sort of tribes of the day. On the other side, we have Ibrahim. He married another person called Hajar or Hajira, and from that relationship, he had a son called Ismail. And Ismail gives us the lineage of the Arabs going down to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right, so that in a nutshell is what we'll be covering today. So let's look at Saleh alayhi salam. So Saleh lived about 400 years after the Banu Ad, right? So, and this was a different part. This was in northern Arabia. As you can see, the dwellings of Thamud. This is the area where the Thamud people lived, and in it were houses again carved in rocks. And Madain Saleh is the place that they refer to. And there's a few remnants of this particular glorious structures that they were able to build, very much like the Ad people. The Thamud people did the same thing, but in this part of Arabia, very far away from the others. And they also kind of took pride in the fact that they could build these dwellings and carve sort of rooms out of the rocks of a mountain and live in it, right? So they also had this amazing ability to build structures in rocks in the valleys. They went further. They believed in idols as their forefathers did, right? So whatever the generations before believed, they simply accepted that, right? They were also very powerful and wealthy, and they also called their prophet Saleh a madman, right? And they wanted a miracle, and a miracle was given to them where out of a rock a camel was brought forth, and this camel Saleh was told them that Allah has commanded that you leave this camel to pasture as it wills, as it freely should, and also when it goes to a water sort of drinking place, allow it to drink as much as it wants to. In other words, don't hinder it in any way. Now, obviously, they saw the miracle in front of their eyes, but with time, they even felt even this miracle was not enough, and they got people from the Banu Thamud, from different families, and they decided, let's kill this camel because we don't want to have anything to do not only with the miracle that Saleh brought, but even with Saleh himself. So once the camel was killed, after that, the destructive storm just came. And some say it was a huge blast, a huge noise, or a scream, or a cry, and that flattened the dwellings of Thamud. Right? So this picture that you see on the slide is one of the remaining remnants of that great civilization, which still survived in one form or the other. Now, what we learn from this lesson, again, is that power and wealth, again, goes into people's heads and results in developing insatiable egos. In other words, they can't satisfy these egos and their divergence from truth and honesty and living a good, healthy, wholesome life, which the prophets all preached. Right, and they preferred the past beliefs that did not challenge their set ways in their lifestyle. So this was, in a nutshell, the story of Saleh and the people of Madain Saleh. Now, on this map, I've got a place called Petra. You can see on top, just south of the Dead Sea, which is in present-day Jordan. Now, I'm going to just refer to Petra very briefly, although it's not covered in terms of any prophets, known prophets having gone there to preach. But essentially, they were also amazing in what they were able to build. Now, if you look at the next slide, I've just got 4 pictures of some of the dwellings that have survived till today. And one of them, so one of them has, in fact, this one has become a World Heritage Site as well. It's still, you can visit it today. So these people that lived in this were like 2-3 centuries even before Saleh's people. And they were the Nabateans, a nomadic Arab people. And they lived a long time in history, and they built this capital in Petra, and it had a whole history of being controlled by the Romans at the time. It became a major trading center for spice and silks and all the rest of it between the known world of Arabia, Egypt, and Syria and Phoenicia at the time. It probably the city itself demised around about 555 after the in this Christian era. So, in other words, just a few years before the Prophet ﷺ was born in Mecca. And by 8th century, it was totally uninhabited. And later on, it became a World Heritage Site. So there's no Prophet linked to this particular area, but I just showed you some of the structures which probably the Ad and Thamud were able to also build something magnificent, is what you see on the screen. Okay, we then move on to our sixth Prophet, Ibrahim alayhi salam. He lived for a period of 175 years. He started his life in a place called Ur, which is just south of Babylon, south of Mesopotamia in present-day Iraq. That's where he lived with his father, who was an idol maker and an idol seller. So he was an idol manufacturer. He had a thriving business, and a lot of people had idols made by him. So he lived with his family in a place called Ur. And then things turned sour as we're going to read later in his story, he questioned the idea of why should people worship idols. So let's start from the beginning. He was tested severely, Ibrahim alayhi salam, in many, many ways, but he still came out the Hanif, which he was a very staunch believer of monotheism, and he was also known as the father of the nation. Right now, in his young days, as a very young boy, he wanted to understand who God was. So one day, and the Quran talks about the story, he looked at the stars, but the stars disappeared. Then he looked at the moon, and the moon also vanished. And he looked at the sun during the day, and the sun also at sunset vanished. So all these heavenly bodies, although they were so majestic in the skies up there, but they were visible for a short while. So he said, I can't believe in any of these things. These are not gods. Right? And slowly but surely he was led to believe in Allah, who was ever present and who guided his course of life later when he became a prophet. So this was as a young boy. Then we move on to his father and the idols that he made. Uh, and one day he kind of questioned, why are people believing in these idols that were located somewhere in Ur? And he couldn't understand why people worship stone or wood or anything like that, human sort of man-made things, right? And one day when he chose the opportunity, when the community went for like a festival outside of the town, he took an axe and he broke all the small idols down, and then he put the axe on the shoulder of the largest idol there. And when the people came, obviously they were all shocked and said, who did this and what happened? And one of them mentioned that it was Ibrahim alayhi salam, and when Ibrahim was summoned to them, uh, he was asked the question, who broke all these idols? And he gave a remarkable answer. He said, ask the biggest one. In other words, if you believe in this, in all these idols, and the big one is still remaining there and he's seeing what happened, obviously he'll know. So obviously the people were dumbstruck with this particular answer, and the core of their belief was challenged. In other words, idolatry was like done with and put, put to like zero, as it were. So, in any case, what they decided, they can't let this thing go sort of unpunished. So they got his father into the meeting and they said, you know what, let's burn this man, because if he's gonna affect our belief in your business, the father's business, and he's gonna change the status quo. In other words, our society will not be what it always was. you know. So they prepared a huge fire, they threw him in, but Allah commanded the fire to be cool, and he emerged unburnt and unscathed. Right? And after that event, they said, well, look, if we can't deal with him and we can't even get rid of him, then the next thing is they told his father, you know what, chase him out of your house and let him go into exile, in other words, make a hijrah permanently and leave us as a community. So this was one of the prophets that went into exile from his home and his family. Right, so I think what we learned from this particular part of the story, and because it's a bit of a long story, I'm going to put the brown print in between to take out the lessons immediately from that particular part of the story. So here we can see He was very strong about monotheism. And also, if it came to the point of him opposing his father because of monotheism, it's something he just had to do because, monotheism and your family relationships kind of don't go together if they are in conflict with one another. Right? And also because the father himself, while he sort of kind of tried to convince him about the evil way that his father was indulging in, he couldn't stop what he was doing because it was his livelihood and it was his income and all the rest of it. So the father kind of said, you know what, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And if you don't like it, you leave. Okay, so this is the way he left. And he, in fact, wanted to he even made some du'as for his father, but Allah advised him not to because he said, you can't, if you're not going to change him and he's set in his ways, then leave him as he is. Still have respect for him as a father, but you can't pray for him as such. Right, so this is an example where he spoke truth to power. He opposed his father and the leaders of the community and went his own way. Then we find another chapter in his life after he went through, and if I go back just to look at the map again, you see from Ur he went to Babylon further north. Then he went to a place called Fadan Aram, and then to Haran, and then to Aleppo in Syria, and then down to Jerusalem, Hebron. So he did this whole migration going right through across. And it was here in Jerusalem, in fact, in Hebron, where he lived in this place called later on. They called it Al Khalil because Khalil was the friend of Allah, title given to him when he became a prophet. And here at this place is when he married Hajira, the second wife, and from that marriage emerged Ismail alayhi salam as a young baby, and then the command came for him to go to Mecca and build the Kaaba. So it was a long journey. As you can see the arrow going down and going up. He came with the wife and a newborn little baby and came to Makkah as under the divine command of Allah to come there and live with them. And then later on, as his son grew bigger, then they were even commanded to build a Kaaba. Right, so there was one trip he made where he settled them and he had to leave, and then he came back a second time and then he left again, and then he never returned to Mecca after that. So we're going to talk about these two trips of his to Mecca. And then while he was there, he even made one trip across to Egypt, and he came back to Hebron. And Hebron is where he passed away, and his grave is in the Mosque of Al Khalil because he lived in that precinct. He died there and he was buried there. And later on, a mosque was built around the Qabr of Ibrahim as well as some of the other Anbiya that's buried there, and that became the Mosque of Al Khalil. All right, so if we carry on with the story, he migrated to a barren place called Makkah, and you can see the picture on the right. Absolutely nothing, a 3 or 2 year or there, and basically rocks with nobody inhabiting this place. It was absolutely dry, barren land, right? And when he came here, he made dua for two things, for the sustenance and livelihood of all those who go there. And this dua, years ago, before, only came into sort of acceptance much later when obviously the Zamzam water gushed forth when Hajira was running between the two hillocks of Safa and Marwa looking for water for the young baby. And also, uh, it then began as a little community because once water was found, then at least one or two like families and tribes came and established a little community around this place of Bered Makkah. Right now, if what we learn from this particular part of the story is both Ibrahim and the very young son Ismail accepted the commands of Allah. So when the command came that he must sacrifice his son, in other words, actually slaughter his son, now this sounded rationally absurd to kill a human being and more so a child in his infancy. Right? So when the Prophet Ibrahim was like given this command, he asked his son, "What do you think?" And the son actually was like a prophet himself already from that young age, in a sense that he said, "You know what? You do as you are commanded, and I'll patiently accept my fate because it's Allah's decree that it should be that." So basically, they passed the trials of Shaitan's whispering. And we reenact this, the overpowering of the shaitan in the rituals of Hajj by stoning this Jamarat tree, the three stone pillars, where Ibrahim and his son, while he was going to make the sacrifice with him, with the knife in hand, one hand, and the son in the other, he was tempted by at 3 points in Muzdalifah, where there's a Jamara, Ula, the Usta, and the Aqaba, the three Jamarat. He was kind of tempted by Shaitan to say, why, your God, is he a bloodthirsty God? Why does he want you to kill a son? And, putting like all sort of thoughts to dissuade him from actually doing the sacrifice. But in any case, both father and son continued, and when they put the knife to the neck of Ismail, Allah created the miracle of replacing Ismail by a ram or a sheep, and Ibrahim slaughtered the sheep, and that became one of the rituals of Hajj that we celebrate up to today in a symbolic way, where in these three places we have to pelt the shaitan and pelt the evil that's within us and the evil thoughts and whisperings that shaitan always pounds us with, and to lead a better life. And so this is what we do. All right, then we go later on in his life. His wife, obviously at the time, went frantically in search of water, and miracle water of Zamzam started oozing out of the ground for the first time. And ever since then, till today, that well of Zamzam is gushing water, and we all have the benefit of drinking it when we go there. Now, this act of Hajar, of going between Safa and Marwa, asking Allah and pleading for, sustenance and water, Allah accepted that dua and gave her Zamzam. Right, and this from here we learn what is the power of dua, both Ibrahim's dua as well as Hajar's dua, of what it was to sustain life in a barren desert, and it became true. Then much later in life, when Ismail alayhi salam was actually married, and Ibrahim and Ismail had never met. So one day Ibrahim decides to go to Makkah, and he visits his married son while his son was away on the field. So Ismail's wife, not knowing who Ibrahim was, started complaining about Ismail in his absence. And Ibrahim had this quality that many prophets and even other wise men sometimes have, is sometimes they can just look at an individual's face and hear the person say just one line or something, and he can read that person's character through and through, and he realized that, you know what, this is not a wife that's suitable to Ismail, because he knew how Ismail was. And so, in any case, he left a little message for Ismail, and then he left again, and he went away and he never met Ismail after that. And Ismail, on his return from the fields, he understood the hint given when he returned, and he later married someone else, just in fulfillment of the father's wish that if she's not good for you, then definitely somebody else can be. Right, and so that was another part of the story. And then later on, Ibrahim had another son, Ishaq, miraculously, even though his wife Sarah was barren, and both were as old as between 90 or 100, and this progeny became the Banu Israel. Right, and he was regarded as a patriarch, or the father figure of the three major religions, because all the descendants of him, they started like Musa alayhi Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Isa, and Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So that's why he was known as the patriarch, or the father of all the religions. He's buried in this mosque in Hebron, named Al Khalil, and the Quran also has another ayah refers to him as an ummah on his own. In other words, a unique distinction from all the prophets. So it says here, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifan. So to give you two qualities there. Indeed, Ibrahim was a nation, qanitan, obedient, absolute obedience to Allah. And we know this from the stories that this is what he did. And he was a hanif, in other words, a believer in pure monotheism through and through. So this is the man in a nutshell, the man who started uh, the ball rolling and created Makkah as a thriving hub with the Kaaba as the center of all faiths. to go to and make the rituals of Hajj and Umrah. Right, and this is Masjid Ibrahim or Masjid Al Khalil in Hebron, and it's a big one, obviously built over the small cemetery where it's believed that four of the prophets are buried, which is Ibrahim, his son Ishaq, his wife Rivka, his son Yaqub of Ishaq, and then his son Yusuf alayhi salam as well. So there are a few prominent graves in this particular masjid. And today, as you know, Hebron is under siege, and half of it is been cordoned off for Jews to come and pray, and the other half, or the front part, for Muslims. And there are days of the week when, or days in the year when the entire mosque is given to the Jews to do their own prayers and their celebrations and whatever else they do. But the Muslims on the other end are not given the so-called Jewish side of the of this particular mosque ever again, and yet they looked after the entire precinct for thousands of years before that. Okay, so that's the history of Ibrahim alayhi salam in a nutshell. All right, we then move on to Lut. Lut alayhi salam. He lived almost parallel to Ibrahim alayhi salam in the same period. He lived for a period of 80 years, and he was based in these two little cities called Sodom and Gomorrah, which is on this side of the Dead Sea. And Sogar is the area where Lut alayhi salam fled to before the punishment descended on Sodom and Gomorrah. Right, so it's all in the same locality. And the Dead Sea we know is the border between occupied Palestine on that side and Jordan on this side. Right, so the Dead Sea is like the border is cut in half there, as it were. Right, now what was the problem in Lut's community? The city of Sodom, homosexuality and highway robbery were rife. In other words, two things, right? The homosexuality part and the highway robbery is where basically they could see trade caravans coming and going, and they sometimes stopped these caravans and stole from their goods or charged them a fee to pass this area. So they were kind of, the uh, sort of the highway robbers of the day. Right? So essentially, there were two crimes that these people were guilty of. Right? Now, Lut preached to these people to lead upright moral lives, not indulging in homosexuality and not impeding the movement of the travelers. Now, what they did is they called him a liar. The previous prophet was called a madman. And like that, everybody was called something, and they wanted to force him out. In other words, they also wanted to kick him out. All right, so they transgressed beyond limits, and they went so far as saying, Lut, you saying that there's going to be a punishment sent from God to us, show it to us. Bring it on. All right, so they call him a liar. And right, so Lut ordered his immediate family and the few followers that he had to leave that town of Sodom one night. And they were told, leave your wife behind, because your wife was one of them. In other words, she encouraged homosexuality to continue as a way of life. So, and what happened? Next day, the skies rained down with stones of baked clay or brimstone. And the Dead Sea is a reminder of Allah's wrath on this community that included his wife who supported them. Right. Then we move on to, now this one, I thought I'll go into a bit more detail in terms of the ayat that are revealed, because homosexuality is becoming such a big thing today in our midst that I think we need to know what the Quran says about it. And the Quran, and here's 5 references which you can refer to on your own. So that's the surah number, and these are the verse numbers, and there are a number of verses that relate the story of Lut. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight a few salient ayat, not going through every verse or ayat line by line. Now, the first thing is in Lut, when he said to his people, what do you commit in outrage? This word fahisha, right? That none of the communities or all societies in the past before you never ever committed before you. In other words, the first time in the history of humankind that this fahisha, this open, brazen, sexual sort of deviation was sort of committed, and it was committed by lots of people in the area. Right? Now, this word fahisha is even in, if you look at, the second khutbah, there's one ayah that's always quoted, Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl, in other words, with justice, Allah commands your justice, wal ihsan and good, and wa ita'i dhil qurba, and showing grace to your relatives, وَيَنْهَى and forbids you from fahsha, indecencies, wal munkar and wal baghi, and oppression and evil deeds. Now, fahsha and fahisha is the same root. In other words, it's something that's an outrageous thing. It's deviancy of magnitude that we need to keep away from. Right? Then Allah uses other words to describe them. He uses the word musrifun. In other words, they were insiraf, in other words, they were profligate or extravagant or wasteful. In other words, their desire for men over women was overwhelming. Mm. So their sexual urges, they didn't go to women, they went to men instead. Then we have, in response to what he preached to them, they said about him that you are an unas yatatahharun. You're a kind of a puritanical lot. As you want purity to the extreme. Why don't you just leave us to commit what we're doing? Do what we can or what we want to do, and you go your way and we'll go ours, right? So there's this sort of rebuttal from Lut's community to Lut himself. So I won't go through all of them because we've got another few slides about this. Now, the other thing in the other Surah 26, what the Qawm Lut, the people of Lut did is they denied or they impugned or they disputed the validity of Lut being one of the apostles or one of the prophets sent. Right? So that's the first thing. They said, who are you to tell us? We don't even believe you. We think you're a liar and you're definitely not a prophet. So just get out of our lives, sort of. So this is what they did to him, right? Then, and Lut, in response to that, said, you know what? You are my brothers. Allah tattaqoon, from taqwa. Don't you have any God consciousness? Don't you have any fear of Allah that you're doing something that He doesn't like and you're doing it brazenly? And he carries on, he says, surely I am just to you a trusted apostle. So and this was his message. Fattaqu, in other words, have taqwa in Allah and wa'ati'un, and obey me. And also on top of it, I'm not asking you for any reward. You don't have to pay me. I'm not seeking any remuneration from you giving you this message. Just obey. Okay. Now, if you look at and there's the crime that the Quran that you coming to males instead of females, and you're a qawmun adun. Ad is ad is a transgressing, someone who commits transgression. In other words, sins over and over. And they went further. It says that if you don't stop preaching to us, then we're gonna surely you're gonna be banished. In other words, we're gonna send you in exile as well, like how they did to Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? And he says, in the end, he just said, Inni le amalikum, about your deeds. I simply detest it. I'm Colleen, right? And he makes his dua, oh Allah, deliver me and my family from what they do, because he distanced himself from what they were about and what they were doing. We go to the next ayat, which is, it says, you came with, it's again that fahisha, the indecency once more, and the world never saw it before. Then it goes on, do you come to men, cut off the way, this highway robbery, and commit outrages in your gatherings? Now, even this thing, although it's not specifically, but you can imagine it might have been where groups of men went to other groups of men and had orgies of sorts or whatever, because this is what committing outrages in your gatherings is a reference to. Right? And having done all these three crimes, they just turned to Lut and said, bring on Allah's punishment. And we don't trust you. In other words, we don't even believe you, and you're not actually truthful. Imagine telling a prophet that on his face. And so Allah, he says, oh Allah, help me against this. And he uses another word to describe them, mufsid. Fasad is a lot, people that create fasad is like corruption in the land. So this was a corruptive practice. So mufsidin is another important, very strong word that Allah describes them with. Right? And right, and lastly, this yaf sukun from fasik. Fasik is a transgressor as well. So mufsid, fasik, fajir, fahisha, all these are words that are very, very strong and relate to Lut alayhi salam's people. Let's do one more before I stop. This one says, he uses another word. He says they are a qawmun mujrimin. No, jaram is a guilt, guilty or a crime. Somebody who commits a crime. So mujrimin was also used to describe them. Then later on, the word ghabirin is used to describe his wife because she was the laggard, the one who remained behind because she was with them. Then obviously, he was scared about what they're going to do to his guests. And he asked that, be wary of Allah and don't humiliate me. And he just ends with ayatin lil mutawassimin. So here, I think I'll stop at this point because the time is up. But there's a little more to say about Lut and the impact that his life will have on us in terms of the LGBTQI plus movement of today. So that's the issue I'll be raising in my next session. This is just a picture of the Dead Sea. It's quite a big one. And maybe I just finish with this one about we know about the relationship. This Dead Sea is also called Bahar Lut or Buhirat Lut or Bahrat Lut or Birkat Lut, and many other names. And Gomorrah is an example for the unbelievers, and the wife was obviously married to a righteous man but didn't believe in his message. Then the question arises, should we visit the Dead Sea? Now, if it is to reflect on the oppression that took place there and the resultant punishment and to take heed and admonition from it, then possibly go there just to see what was Sodom and Gomorrah and the Dead Sea like, right? But in terms of the Dead Sea products, they sell a lot of these in those shops there. It's best to keep away from these because, you know, essentially that land, that stone, that brimstone, everything in that area was part of the punishment that was meted out to Lut's people. So we need to keep away, far away from anything that deals with the punishment that Allah had given to a community, and Allah knows best. And the sea is called dead because it is got very high salinity and no fish survive in it, but some minuscule elements of bacteria and fungi can be seen there. Right, and then the last one, I'm just going to show you the Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth, with its shores being 430 meters below sea level. And also, it's the deepest hypersaline lake in the world at 304 meters deeper than that, the shores around it. So it's something like 700 meters below sea level, this particular sea. When they talk of the hypersaline, means it's got such a high salt content in the water that if you ever have to jump in, you must never let your eyes touch that water because once the water, that salt water goes into your eye, it will burn like crazy, and you need clean water to clean yourself quickly. The other thing about this lake is you can't drown in this lake because of the heavy salt content in the water. So you only float. But in the floating also, it's very important not to go even one breath or one turn your face the other way and get water into your eyes. All right, so we'll stop there. والعصر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر